This last summer, we've done a lot of driving in my home, and we've gone to California, we've gone to Jonesboro, Arkansas, so we've gone all the way around. And the trip to California is to see my parents, and it's about a 17-hour drive all the way there. And if you just put yourself inside of a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old body, we are going to lock you into a seat and keep you there for 10 hours at a time. And we will stop occasionally to let you out of that seat, but we're going to lock you in that seat, and you can't move. Now, you can only throw so many Disney movies back there, and different types of things that will pacify a 5 and a 9-year-old, 8-year-old for so long. Eventually, they're going to top out. There's not a show capable of keeping them happy. And Carson topped out about Palm Springs on the way there. And that's about 2 hours away from the final destination. And you leave here and it gets uglier. Well, I'm sorry. It gets different as you keep going. Because I said that at an airport one time and I made a bunch of people mad. But you go, because they thought anyway. And so you drive out and you get into El Paso, and then you get it's all the same. And it just starts to weigh on you and weigh on you. But at the end of the trip is Grandpa and Grandma's house, along with all the food and the non-spanking zone that you enter into, and all of the fun that you're going to have in that environment, a pool and all of that. It's just this dynamic, wonderful environment. Disneyland is just over there, although you're not going. At least it's closer. It's right there. It's just this wonderful paradise that you just can't wait to get to. But in between here and there is like Yuma. Okay, it's like there's nothing there. It's like Deming. There's nothing there but a La Quinta. I mean, there's just nothing there. And about Palm Springs, which is where people go to retire, and I don't know why, but they get there. Carson finally goes, I can't handle it. He just melts down. He's in that chair for 6 hours one day, and then he's into this 8 hours the next day. And we're throwing goldfish and different types of things. It's just not working. And when you get to that point on the drive, you really have no choice. You have to keep going. Can you really stop? Can you stop at that we stopped at a gas station. It was the only thing there. There was nothing else there. The dogs didn't even want to get out of the car. Dog. There's nothing there. It's just, and when you melt down like that, I'm looking at cars going, buddy, we got 2 hours. Just hold on for 2 more hours. Just hold on. Just hang tough. We got 2 hours to go. And it's funny when you talk about a drive, but have you ever had that happen in life? The problem is you don't know when it's going to end, and you get to that point in life where things have just not worked right. You've gotten laid off, the relationship broke up, the children aren't doing what they want them to do. We want them to do. They're doing exactly what they want to do, but not what you want them to do. Things aren't working right, and you just feel like at some point you just go, and you just want to stop. Stop. I just want to stop. But you can't. Because the sun comes up tomorrow, and tomorrow is going to happen, whether you or you just keep going. You can't stop. And we talked last week about a lady inside of Scripture. If you have your Bibles, we'll find her story again. It's the book of Ruth. And if you'll find your place there, if you're new to the Bible, if you start at the very beginning in Genesis and you just kind of move over in my Bible about 260 pages, you'll find the book of Ruth. And as we talked last week, Ruth falls into a place of history where everything is dark around Ruth. Everything. The context, culturally speaking, everything is dark. The book of Judges is one of the darkest books inside of the Old Testament as far as how man is behaving, because he's doing very, very poorly, extremely, extremely bad. And last week we laid out what happens then, and the book of Judges ends with it saying that man did what was right in his own eyes. And that's a bad formula. If man does what is right in his own eyes, it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. And it's as bad as it's ever been. When you read the book of Judges, it's just terrible. You think today is bad? Go read the book of Judges and you will be heartbroken. And that's where the book of Ruth happens. And while it's titled the book of Ruth, I'm looking at the book of Naomi and Ruth. There are 2 women inside of this book. It's not just Ruth. Ruth is a heroine in this story, but begins and it ends with Naomi, this woman whose name means pleasant, and her story is not very pleasant. In so many ways, her story is tragic. And we're looking at how God rearranges our hearts and how he rearranges our lives. And in this story, we pick up in verse 6, where God has got Naomi to the end of her rope. And many of you, I'm sure, have been there. You might be there, and you might not be there today, but one day you will get there where you'll be at that moment Carson was in life, where things have just been rearranged, things are not going the way you anticipated, and you just, I want to stop. Because that's where Naomi is. She leaves Bethlehem, the house of bread, because there's no bread. It's kind of ironic. The house of Bethlehem, house of bread, the pantry is empty. That means there's no rain ever. We can relate to that, okay? There's no rain whatsoever. It is hot, it's dry, and there's no food. And so Elimelech leads his family off into this land of Moab, which for an Israelite to leave the promised land is a very difficult decision. It's like a Texan moving to Oklahoma. Texan moving really anywhere. I was driving through California with my Texas plates on, and you feel like a target. Like they're all coveting where I'm leaving to, And so that's where they are now. They're in Moab, and it's been a very difficult process to do that. We're not told whether it's right or whether it's wrong. It's just one of those things that it just happened. And sometimes in life, things just happen. So Elimelech says, I got to feed my family. Off to Moab. And there he dies. If you can imagine, Naomi leaves with a full household. She's got Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion. Cool name, Chilion. Gotta like it. Or you can say Kilion, but it doesn't sound healthy. Chilion sounds better. And so leaving off, there they go, and Elimelech dies. And after a period of time, the boys marry. We're not told how old the boys are, so it's hard to put a timeline on this. But we know that eventually they marry. The boys marry inside of Moab, which is interesting because that tells me that they are going to fully assimilate into Moabite culture. Okay, they didn't go back to Israel to get a wife. They married outside the Jewish family, and so they have assimilated inside of Moab. And then 10 years later, as it says in verse 4, it says in verse 5, then Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Her life has been dramatically rearranged. Husband and 2 boys gone. Pick up the story in verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the land of Moab. For she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of your husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, No, 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 but we will surely return with you to your people. Naomi replies, Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to even have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, no. It's harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone against me. They lifted up their voices, and they wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And then she said, Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said in verse 16, Do not urge me to leave you, or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Think about these 2 ladies that have come together here, Naomi and Ruth. They're different in age. You have Naomi, who's elderly, and who's had a husband who's probably at least 20 years older than Ruth. You have Ruth, who's we don't know how old she is, but she's in the prime of her childbearing years. And they're different in their childbearing years. Whereas Naomi is looking forward to grandchildren, Ruth is looking forward to having children. It's kind of an interesting thing. They're separated by a whole generation. They're also different in their stages of life. One different in the stage. Ruth is looking to be a mother. Naomi is looking to be a grandmother. They're different in their grief, in that Naomi has had her family taken from her. Ruth has had her future family taken from her. Naomi had 2 sons and a husband. Ruth had a husband hoping to have sons. Both of them have been bereft of their families. They're gone, and they're different in their ethnicity. It's probably the biggest difference of them all in that Ruth is a Moabite. Naomi, she's a Jew, and one's a Gentile, one's a Jew, and never have 2 people been so different. Ruth is not even a Jewish name. Ruth is a Moabite name. It's a Gentile name. We've adopted it, or the Jews have adopted it as a Jewish name, but it's not Jewish, it's Gentile. This is a book has got a Gentile name to it, okay? So Ruth is a Gentile. Naomi is a Jew. The ethnicities are so different, are so separate, so far apart. These ladies are completely different in many, many ways, but they have some similarities as well. Both women are alone. In our culture today, that's difficult. In this culture, it's nearly impossible. It's not like the female can go out and work the plow and get a job, perhaps at a fast food joint or at some location. No, it's all built around that male and his inheritance. It's very difficult for females in this time, especially with the backdrop of Judges. If you read the stories in Judges, women are abused, and it's very, very difficult, and these women are alone. They've lost their financial stability and the protective side that a husband brings or sons brings. They're completely alone, and that makes them vulnerable. Neither are able to strike out alone. What are they going to do to provide for themselves? And now here they are, they're torn. And the song that keeps coming through my mind is, "Do I stay or do I go now?" Did anybody remember that song from the 80s? How many of you grew up in the 80s listening to the radio? Okay, so do I stay or do I go now? And so here, Ruth is thinking, do I stay? Naomi's going, well, I'm going to go. Well, I'm going to stay. Well, you go. And they're torn. And if you can imagine this process of them leaving. Because when Naomi leaves, she leaves at least 10 years of history in that place. The friends, the acquaintances that she has, the familiarity with everything around her, the farm that perhaps she and Elimelech had. She's leaving all the assets that she cannot carry or sell. She's leaving everything behind. She's going to a different place. But not only is she leaving all of those things, she's leaving 3 graves. Think about that for just a little while. It's one thing to leave your husband's grave. That's difficult. But 2 of your two boys, you're going to leave their graves behind? Extremely difficult. Those of you who've gone through the loss of a husband, and then some of you have gone through the loss of a child, leaving that behind and going to another place. Boy, she's torn. She's torn in this, and she's not sure. That had to have been one of the most difficult things to do. I read an article this last week about how you and I experience time. The author's premise was that we're always actually living in the past by about 800 milliseconds, because what I just said is in the past. It's in the past. We live in this real quick second of what's actually happening right now. We're usually responding to what happened in the past. And so his premise is that everything is happening. We're always responding to what's going on in the past. And it sounds like I'm talking like the Matrix or something. But we're always living in how to deal with the past. But I'm not sure if we even want the present as much as we like to know about the future. We'd like to know how tomorrow is going to end up. Because if I can just know about tomorrow, I'll understand the past. If I can just know about tomorrow and how all of this fleshes out, then yesterday's not as difficult because I get it. I understand the future. And here you and I know how this story ends, but please put yourself in their story. They don't know. They know nothing of Boaz. They know nothing of a harvest. They know nothing of this. There they are standing on the border, leaving town of Moab, heading off to Judah once again, and they do not know how it's going to end. They're scared, they're torn, they're terrified of what is going to take place next. But notice how this happens. And notice, I think there are 3 different sections inside of this story, and we'll point them out as we go along. But notice, first of all, she arose in verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law. And don't walk by that. She arose. She got up. That's hard to do. She's lost a husband, 2 sons. Getting up after a sad event like that is going to be very, very difficult. She's actually going to get up. And some of you have been through that kind of experience where God has rearranged your life in a certain way and in some powerful way, and you wake up the next day and you just think, I don't know if I can get up. I don't know if I want to face another tomorrow. I don't know if I want to see what's going to happen next. They come in threes. I've already had two. I don't want the third. What's going to happen next? And what I see inside of this is that she is willing to stand up. She gets up. But notice what she gets up and why she gets up. Notice the end of that verse 6, that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard from the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. Why did she get up? She heard that the Lord was at work somewhere, and she got up. She got up, and what she does in this story right here is that she turns to God, not away from God. She hears that God's at work, and sometimes when we get our lives rearranged, we just want to go, God, I'm done with this. You've done too much. I'm done with this. She's lost a husband and 2 sons. She gets up. Why? She hears God is at work, and she wants to go to that place. I want to go to where God is working. And she turns to God, not away from God. It's kind of like in a marriage. I deal with a lot of married couples and over the last 12 or so many years in the ministry. And oftentimes when a couple goes through a trauma, they have to make a decision in the middle of that trauma. It could be any type of thing. They have to deal with that relationship. And sometimes couples will turn away from each other emotionally and physically. Because when they come in and they talk to me, I've noticed they don't look at each other. They'll look at me, but they won't look at each other. And it's really odd because I'll pick up on that. And they'll talk to me about the problem, but they won't make eye contact. And I'll bring that up about halfway through the thing, and I'll say, if y'all noticed you haven't looked at each other? And they go, look at who? Well, yeah, that's the problem. You haven't looked at each other. And it's because when a couple goes through a stressful environment or a stressful time, they have to make a decision. They're either going to turn to each other and work on it as a married couple, or they're going to turn away from each other and not deal with one another. They'll grow cold. And they'll come into the office and they'll wonder what's wrong. And the simple solution is you've turned away, not to one another. And it happens in marriages. And eventually, unless they fix that relationship and turn to one another, the marriage crumbles and it falls apart. And it happens with God the same way. Whereas we go through an experience and God takes us through a rearrangement of our lives and we get mad and we turn away from God into something else. You got to turn to something. It could be a hobby. It could be a career. It could be an addiction. It could be just about anything. We turn away from God rather than turning to God. And what I see happening inside of Naomi's life here is that all this bad has happened. She's been emptied of everything that would give her any status or any position. And who does she get up to turn to? She turns her face to the promised land and says, I'm going to walk that away. She arose. And you might be in that position in your life where you've been down. You have to decide at some point to get back up. Say, I'm going to get up and I'm going to turn to God. I'm going to go to where God is at work. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to get involved in a small group. I'm going to get involved in something that has God in it. That way I can find what God is going to do. Because in life you could stop. You literally can do this in a relationship with God. You just stop. I'm just going to stop. Some people will get mad at God. Some people will run to God. Some people just become indifferent to God and just put God on pause. I'm just going to stop. I'm not going to do anything with God. I'm just going to stay right here. If you do that, you won't find the answers. You won't find the hope. You won't find the peace. You won't find the cure. You won't find the solution to what God is doing in that environment. So what I see inside of her life right here is that she actually got up and she turned to. Life is going to knock you down. That doesn't mean you're a failure, only if you don't get back up. You have to get back up and see what God has for you. You turn to God rather than away. And then there's another thing that it says here inside of her story. Notice what it says in verse 7. And I think there's 2 different parts here. So she departed in verse 7 from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. She not only got up, she left. She got up and she left. And that had to have been incredibly difficult because she is now going to leave all of those things behind. She is going to get up and she is going to depart. I'm leaving all that is familiar. I'm leaving all that is comfortable, and I'm going to another unknown place. Can you imagine? She left Bethlehem because Bethlehem didn't have any food. Well, we're just going to go start over there. She left Bethlehem full, a husband and 2 sons. She's going to come back empty. Can you imagine what the ladies are going to say at the water cooler in Bethlehem about her? Oh, there's Naomi, that haughty Naomi, that had, haughty, H-A-U-G-H-T-Y, not H-O-T-T. There's that. I need to clarify that. That's not even written. But anyway, and so I got to make sure when she goes back and she says, oh yeah, there's that Naomi. She thought she was better than us, and here she comes. Showed her leave the promised land. All the different things that she's going to face when she's going to back. She's going to have to retell the story of all that took place. She's going to have to face those, temple people, which we would call church people, who are going to say, well, you shouldn't have left, because that's just near. You should have stayed here with us. All the judgment, all the things that she's going to face that she shouldn't have to face, but she's going to face, and she's going to actually leave and go that way. And there's a reason for that. When you guys get in your car this afternoon, you'll notice a set of letters that are right there by your car. It's a set of letters like this. You know what it means? The R means, the N means. I'm glad we got that. The R there was a little confusing. Okay, the N means what? D means, and then low 1, low 2, and we never even use those. Some have 3, 4, 5, 10, 12. But it's really RND, reverse, neutral, and drive. And I've never been able to figure out why it says drive. Because with the pattern of words, shouldn't it say reverse, neutral, and forward? Thank you. Yeah. It should say, there should be an F right there because we go forward. But they say drive. And if anybody has a good answer for that, let me know. But here's my theory. They assume you're going forward. They don't assume you're going to drive. Drive assumes that you're going to pay attention to what you're doing and you're going to actually control the car. That's not an assumption. Forward is an assumption. Why? Because a car was built to go forward. You spend very little time in reverse. In fact, your whole car is engineered to go forward. There's a bigger windshield, the mirrors are small, and you wouldn't dare get on 42nd and go north in reverse, would you? How fast do you think you could go? You wouldn't. You would crash as quickly as you got into reverse. Can you imagine flooring it, going in reverse up 42nd Street? It wouldn't work. Why? Because your car is built to go forward. It's assumed. The word drive, however, is not. They want you to control the car and make it go a certain direction. And when it comes to life, your life is built for forward. It's not built for neutral, and it's not built for reverse. Your life is built for forward. And I don't know how God has rearranged your life. I don't know how God has changed things around. You might be stuck in neutral. That's not where God has wired your life. God has wired life to move forward. Every day, it goes forward. You're older today than you were yesterday, and you have nothing to do with it. You can't even stop it. Many have tried. I think there's some Harvard scientists who came up with the anti-aging cream this last week. It was on the Facebook. Stop putting that stuff on Facebook. Don't forward that stuff. But it was literally these Harvard guys have stopped the aging process. Whatever, you're moving forward, and one day it's all going to end up low, okay? You're going to die. It's going to end. But life is built to go that way. It's built to go that way spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And she arises, she gets up, she departs, she goes forward. You can't stay stuck. You get stuck when you can think only about revenge, vengeance, anger, disappointment, depression. You get stuck. God hasn't built you for stuck. God has built you for forward. Naomi arises and she goes to where the Lord is, and she leaves because life is built to go forward, just like your car. So when you put it in reverse for that brief moment today, and then you drop it into drive, it's just like your life. God's going to rearrange it. The goal is to draw you closer to Himself. If you stop, you will not get one step closer to God. He wants you to continue to move forward. Keep going forward. Set aside. That's what Hebrews says. Lay aside the sins that so easily entangles us. Put it aside. Why? So you can run forward, leaving those things behind. And that doesn't mean you won't learn from them. That's why in cars we have rear view mirrors. We learn from the past, but we don't cast vision from the past. God has always pushed us forward. In fact, the whole Bible is a forward-moving book. All the way, he has us to stop and remember things that happen with feasts and festivals and one day of work, one day of rest. But God designs us to move forward. And inside of Naomi's story, she decides in verse 6 to get up. She decides in verse 7 to depart, and she is going to go forward. And as she does, she discovers something she had no idea was there. The story progresses where she gives them a great blessing. Her heart is so sweet. She gives them a tremendous blessing of departure. And of course, Orpah and Ruth are torn. They don't want to leave their mother-in-law. There's a deep, deep love for each other here, which I pray is your joy, that you could have a wonderful relationship with your in-laws. There's a lot of mother-in-law jokes and father-in-law jokes, and they're funny. But I pray that you have a healthy relationship with your mother-in-law and a healthy relationship with your father-in-law, as exemplified here with this commitment between these ladies. And then Orpah, in verse 14, kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Now, don't be mad at Orpah, okay? Don't be mad at Orpah. She's just following. She didn't do anything wrong. And besides that, the heroine of the story is Ruth. You can't have two heroines. Orpah's hard to say. Ruth is easier to say, so we'll go with Ruth. So Orpah goes back home. It would have been fun to have Orpah, because you can't say Orpah without going, Orpah! But anyway, it's not Jewish, it's Moabite. But anyway, it doesn't work. So Orpah goes back home. Ruth stays right there. And it's the word clung, and I love that. When you give somebody a chest bump, maybe when you hug, like Chris and I will do that, we'll bump, hey, how are you? And then that's just a quick bump. Don't linger too long there. And then you get the hug, the brief embrace, how are you? And then you step away from that. And then there's the awkward long hug. When that happens to you and you let your arms go limp a little bit and the other person doesn't, and then you're left going, how do I get out of this? Okay, that's where Naomi is, right there. She has given her, good see you later, and they've done a quick embrace, and then Naomi realizes that Ruth is clung, like not letting go. She's holding on, and Naomi's like, "Ooh, hey, let's." And then I can just hear her saying those words, Ruth saying those words to Naomi. And can you imagine how that just fueled her heart? Can you imagine? Hear those words from a lady, from Naomi, who's been emptied of everything, and Ruth is clinging to her, and she whispers, perhaps in her, "Do not urge me to leave you. I will never leave you. Do not urge me to go. I will, wherever you go, I go. And where you lodge, I lodge. Your people are my people. Where you die, I die. And thus may God do so severely to me, if anything but death comes between you and me." Tight squeeze. She steps back, and that sense of determination that had to be emanating from Ruth's eyes. I will not leave you. Can you feel that in Naomi? Just, you're not leaving. Death lingers this whole section here, and she uses the death word. Nothing but death will come separate us. What commitment. And in this process, what she discovers on this is that she has an ally, a friend that she had no idea was present. She thought she would just dispatch of Ruth and dispatch of Orpah, and there they would go. And then she would be left there by herself, all alone. She discovers in this whole process that she has a Ruth inside of her life of such value. And that value will only increase as they walk back to Bethlehem. It's kind of funny when you look at it. Ruth has no idea what she's getting herself into. I mean, her name is Ruth. Nobody in Bethlehem or Judah is named Ruth, all right? What good is a Gentile in Israel? Okay, not much, quite frankly, not much. Ruth has no idea what she's getting herself into. Naomi has brought with her potentially a liability, because every time Ruth's name is mentioned, you know what it says? Ruth the Moabite. Ruth the Moabite. How would you like to be known by, you, the divorcee, you, the guy who got fired, you, the one who doesn't fit in, you, the one that failed, you, this. That's what Ruth is known by in this whole book. Ruth the Moabite, the people from out there. And by the end of the story, it's Ruth in the lineage of David. So it's kind of cool how God brings her in there. But Ruth doesn't know any of that. But this whole process, when Naomi leaves, she rises in verse 6, she leaves in verse 7, and when she walks out in that last section there, she discovers she has a community of faith. She has a commitment of Ruth beside her. And I don't know what environment you're in, what you're struggling with, but you need that to get through it. You have to have that. You have to have somebody in your life that you know is not going to leave you. Your spouse, your family, a dear friend. You've got to have that. Naomi didn't even know she had it. By the end of the story, she looks at Ruth and says, well, cling on, let's go. Let's walk. You're with me, let's go. And the sense of community that she has there is profound. She arises, she departs, and she discovers along the way that she has somebody inside of her life that is never, ever going to leave. So she arose, she departed, and she discovered community she didn't know she had. And so the storyline goes, it starts really high in the literature. If you look at the structure of it, it starts really high. Wow, she's got all of this. And she gets to the bottom down here where it's all been gone. Orpah goes the other way. And she discovers true community at the bottom. She's not perfect. Naomi is not perfect. Ruth is not perfect. And if you can get into an environment where it's okay not to be perfect, you will find more joy. And I pray that you found it today. Grace abounds. I am not perfect. You are not perfect. Isn't it great to be around a bunch of imperfect people? Isn't it? But you still think you're perfect. I'm sorry. No. We're surrounded by a bunch of people who are imperfect, who have a past that perhaps you're ashamed of, who are in the middle of something that you wish it wasn't there. Welcome to grace, because this is where we start to grow from, where you can move forward, you can set those things behind, and you can start walking in a different direction. But she discovers community when she discovers her brokenness and that she can recover from that. And Ruth is not going to leave her. I remember when I was going through my rearrangement, I told you about that last week. My ex-wife had left, gone. Nothing I could do. She's gone. 1999, nothing that I could do about it. But I discovered Brent Taylor, Chris Moody, B.G. Malamed, and Drew Dickens. They were all part of my life beforehand, but I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Dr. Brent Taylor. I like to call him that. Dr. Brent Taylor. He went to Southwestern. How easy is that? Seminary joke, don't be offended, okay? Anyway, Longhorns make fun of Aggies. DTS grads make fun of Southwestern guys. Anyway, so that's where Brent went. Pastor of First Baptist Carrollton. Changed my heart, changed my life. Chris Moody, he's been here. He's preached my ordination. A powerful friend in my life. I used to run with B.G. Malamed every other day because I can't handle running every day, all right? But every other day I would talk for the first mile and a half, and then he, in better shape than I, would talk for the last mile and a half, okay? B.G. And then Drew. Drew hired me. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a church. I didn't have anything. But Drew gave me a job. And my bigger community of faith is my seminary because they're the only group of people that didn't kick me out. So that's why I love Dallas Theological Seminary. And so you've got to have that community. You've got to have that group around you. And I don't know who they are, where they are, what shape it's going to take, but you will only get to drive in moving forward when you install a community around you. Because then you can be who you are and you can help or you can recover, and they'll help you do that. They'll help you get better. Because God wants the best, not just good, the best. And he does it through community. And that's why we emphasize to you to get involved inside of the small groups. Get involved in going to Lifeline groups. Get involved. Let somebody in. Men will be starting that Friday night drive to a football thing. Ladies, I know it's kind of hard to understand, but that's how men talk, is they get into a bus and they don't say a word, and they go to a football game and they cheer and they come back and don't say a word. And next thing you know, they're good friends, but they haven't really talked. I don't know how that works, but it's true. Women, you get together over coffee, and ladies are planning a retreat in October, and you'll get together and go and have a wonderful time, and you should do that October 24th and 5th, and you'll learn more about it, but you need to go because you need that community. And husbands, you need to make room in your schedule so that your wife can go do that. And what that means is you'll babysit the kids all day Friday night, all day Saturday, and if she comes home Saturday, if not, you'll do it Sunday, okay? You'll take care of your children willfully and joyfully and happily and voluntarily. Amen? Get it? And so you'll let your wife do that. And you need to have that community. God has wired you for that, and you've got to have it. As we go, do you need to get up? Is it time to get up? You've been sitting down there for too long, somewhere between verse 5 and verse 6, where bad has happened, but you haven't arisen yet. Every time I hear the word arose in the church, I want to say, up from the grave he arose. Okay, but you need to get up. You need to get up and go do something now. It's been long enough. You've been having that meltdown in Palm Springs long enough, and it's now time to say, I'm going. I'm getting up. And then you need to go. It's one thing to get up. It's another thing to go. Leave it behind and go. And then as you do, you will discover God's provision as you get up and as you go. God has already provided, and it's been there the whole time. Ruth didn't fall off the moon as Naomi left. Ruth had been there the whole time. Naomi just didn't know about her until she got up and then she left. Then she discovers God's provision, and that will be your story too. You'll get up, you'll go, and you'll discover how God is drawing you closer because he wants to rearrange your life so it goes from your good, which is not bad, but he's got the best. Get up, go, and discover.